The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André. I'm your podcast host, and big thanks to Ukla Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to another fun-filled edition of the show. This episode, I'm speaking with Craig Miller, who is a producer, former marketing kind of expert that worked with Star Wars, the first one, and The Empire Strikes Back, worked on Return to Oz, worked on The Black Cauldron, worked on The Wicker Man, a lot of really cool stuff and stuff that I loved. And is a lot of the stuff he worked on, The Thing, actually, which are like all huge favorite movies of mine. We had a great conversation about some of the hurdles of the marketing world when it came to all those sort of films and what it's like, you know, having a lot of those films, well, not a lot, like he's successful, but quite a few of those films that weren't quite as well received back then that are now called classics today, what that's sort of like. So a lot of great stuff in the episode talking with him about that. He also moved on to writing, did a lot of work in animation, which we chat about as well. But yeah, great conversation. I didn't expect to talk about the marketing side of things as much as we did, but he had a lot of interesting stories. And in fact, he has a book out, Star Wars Memories by Craig Miller. You can buy it on Amazon. It's quite cheap. And Barnes & Noble, we mentioned it was at Walmart at one point. It's in a lot of bookstores, so make sure to check it out. After talking with him, I'm definitely going to give it a read. It sounds like a really cool little book with a lot of great little anecdotes, especially about something that, you know, I love, and I'm sure you probably love if you listen to this show, Star Wars. But, yeah, Craig was super cool. Great conversation. And, yeah, I really enjoyed talking to industry people that kind of were well-rounded, had a lot going on that wasn't just one part of it, that were involved with many different facets. And it sounds like he rubbed shoulders and has friendships with a lot of people that I idolize and dig as well, like Joe Dante and others. So, yeah, it was a great conversation. I try to keep my guests on, you know, for an hour-ish. If it seems to be going well and they don't seem to mind, I'll keep it rolling. And he didn't at all. He was having a great conversation. I kind of wish I could have pushed it a little longer. I probably should have. I just, you know, I don't want to monopolize people's time. But man, what a great conversation. And yeah, just more insight and more reason why you should probably go read his book. So make sure to go do that as well. Yeah, so out in the great wide world, not a whole lot new going on, mostly focusing on the show, some other podcast work in my business. Things are going well with that. I recently got a region-free Blu-ray player, which actually comes up in this talk. And the only reason why I bring it up is because I got some movies in the mail today. Rather, one movie, which is called White Dog by Samuel Fuller. And Samuel Fuller is a writer, director, mostly director, who did a lot of really cool movies. And Criterion's picked up a few of them. They have his Western 40 Guns. They have, which I haven't seen yet, actually. I got to watch that. But he did a lot of really cool movies. Two-fisted sort of crime stuff, noir stuff. Shock Corridor is one of his movies, which is kind of a classic, as well as The Naked Kiss, also a classic film. This guy was tackling like issues long before other films were in the Hollywood system, to do with like a prostitute who wants to leave that world behind and go straight, and how society won't really let her do that. And Shock Corridor goes into like the mental health system and a lot of the ways that certain marginalized groups are viewed and treated by society at large. And amazing movies with something that really important messages to say. White Dog was a movie that Sam Fuller sort of chased him. I don't think it chased him, but it made him so frustrated with the American system. I think he moved to France and started making movies there for a while. But it's a really interesting film that I haven't seen it. So by reputation alone, it's an interesting film. And a lot of people say Criterion put it out on DVD. They never released the Blu-ray. But now that I have a region-free player, if I can track down Blu-ray copy from another country, they're usually pretty cheap. And it's a great way to see the movie in a better aspect ratio and, you know, better resolution. that can let you see more of it and get it as it was meant to be seen. Hopefully, so. Yeah, the particular movie deals with a woman who discovers a dog on the street that has been trained by somebody to attack and block people. So she goes through trying to find a way to, work with this dog and break it of that training. I don't know if it's ever explained where it came from, whatever. But anyway, the guy that is training her is a black trainer of pets and animals who tries to work with the dog. And it's such a deep metaphor for learned versus taught racism, and something that's an important message even today. So very excited to watch it. I'm only mentioning this because I do mention it when I talk with Craig. Sometimes I get excited about the things that I like, and to talk to other people, like-minded people, about these things that I probably bring up things that aren't as necessary, but that's me, and I try to let these interviews sort of flow in more of a conversational way, and to do that is for me to be me, and this is me. So he didn't seem to mind, but just a little bit of context, I guess, if you're tuning in and curious about what that was about. So yeah, let's get to it. So here is my talk with LA native, born in LA. Don't meet a lot of people like that, which is great. A writer of animation, producer of certain films, and as well as a marketing director for some other things as well. So very cool guy. Great conversation, and a lot of inside Hollywood stuff, which I always love to hear. So I hope you do as well, and I'm sure you will. Here's my chat with Craig Miller. Oh man, I love your office. I like that dragon.
Oh, thank you.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing just fine.
Oh, excellent. And you're calling in from sunny Los Angeles, are you?
Sunny but cold. Yes.
Oh.
Well, cold by our standards.
I'm in Toronto, Nova Scotia. It feels like -10 right now.
Yeah, yeah. You're a lot colder.
Yeah, so I'll swap with you if you like.
Yeah, no thanks. I think we're around 50 right now.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, you guys have the our measuring systems are different.
Oh, yes. Well, that's true.
Yeah, that's right. It's all
50
good.
Fahrenheit.
That's right. They had a really funny SNL did a sketch a little while ago when they were like founding America, and they had this really funny little like uh he's going through the way you're going to use all your measurements, and they're all really confusing, and like no one can really follow them, and it was really funny. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, Craig. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So, did you grow up in LA, or is that just where you made it to?
No, I grew up here. I was born
Really?
and raised here.
I meet very few native Californians or Los Angeles people. Any Los Angeles, what is it? Whatever the proper term.
Angelinos.
Angelinos, yes. So, what was growing up there like?
Oh, I mean, it was great. My family wasn't in the entertainment industry, so it was just, a normal childhood, I guess, here. And after I was four, we were in East LA. When I was 4, we moved to West LA. And I've been in that area pretty much ever since. And, it's fine. As an adult, I've been in the entertainment industry all my life. So that's a little weird, but.
Is it strange? Like you said, your parents were involved with the industry. So what did they do?
Oh, no, they weren't in the industry.
Yeah. What do they do?
My father was the name of the job was a dry cleaning route man. He
Oh.
picked up dry cleaning and dropped it off.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was in the women's clothing business
Oh, okay.
and in retail.
So somewhat connected.
Well, only that
Clothing.
wear clothes, but
Fair enough. So what is it like? Like I assume I don't really have a sense of what living in LA would be like if you're not related to the industry. Like is it just pockets of your own thing in your own areas, or is it just like radiating everywhere you go, or?
Well, never having lived anywhere else, I can't really
Fair enough.
compare it fairly. But most people, I think, don't they go about their lives. They work, in a market or a doctor's office
Hmm.
or in an office in general. And um, I don't think uh, other than we are more likely to see an actor out in the wild.
Hmm.
I don't really think it's much different than any other. I mean, it's a big city, so
Hmm.
it'll be like a big city rather than a small town. But no, I think it's a pretty normal life
Yeah.
gen generally. I mean, I was always a comics and science fiction and movie fan, so I was always going to movies.
Hmm.
But
And what introduced you to that world? Was that something you just discovered as a child, or did you have somebody that you knew got you into that sort of thing? Or
well, I mean, it started with comics, reading comics,
Mhm.
buying comics. I started a comic book club at our local park.
Oh, cool.
Um, got to know a bunch of other people who were into comics. I At one point I ended up meeting Ray Bradbury. Ray told me about the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, which was the science fiction club he belonged to when he was younger.
Oh, wow, that's prestigious.
And yeah, well, when he started, he wasn't Ray Bradbury.
Yeah,
He
of
was
course.
the
Yeah,
guy. Um,
but still, the fact
but
he passed it on to you is nice. It's sweet that
yeah,
he carried the tradition on.
and I continued in science fiction fandom as well. Um, and I mean, it was because of fandom I ended up in the entertainment industry. My degrees are all in psychology,
No.
but um, I happened to be active in fandom, and I happened to meet Charlie Lippincott, who was the head of his title was, executive vice president of Star Wars Corporation, but basically Charlie ran everything that wasn't actually making the movies.
Hmm.
Publicity, advertising, licensing. He oversaw, all of our copyright and trademark stuff, working with attorneys, all that stuff. Um, and he knew that marketing science fiction was not what it is today
Hmm.
back in the 70s. In the 70s, science fiction was not popular. We forget that today because every other movie is science fiction or superheroes.
Hmm.
But back then, 2001 was 1968. There was Planet of the Apes, there was Silent Running, but mostly science fiction was thought of as dumb, hokey, for kids kind of movies in the
Hmm.
public mind. And back then, we marketed movies by getting reviews and getting actors on the Tonight Show and the Today Show and all those kind of talk shows. And there was no one in Star Wars that was going to get booked onto a TV show of that type. And certainly the movie itself, being science fiction, wasn't going to get um, uh, anyone booked. It wasn't like a prestige picture.
Hmm.
And so he came up with the idea of we should market it directly to fans, to the people who will definitely come see it.
Hmm.
But while he was aware of fandom and conventions, he wasn't a part of that world. And
Hmm.
so I ended up at first as a consultant and later as a full-time employee at um, Star Wars Corporation and Lucasfilm
Wow.
to help with the marketing of the film. And one thing led to another.
Wow. How did you meet him originally? Is it just through conventions when he was trying to get this thing rolling?
Yeah,
Huh.
basically.
Wow. And was you said you have a degree in psychology, but at this point, did you already have that? Were you?
Um, I was finishing I had a degree in child development and I was finishing a degree in social psychology
Hmm.
when I first was consulting, and then I graduated and went full time once I had graduated and the film came out.
Well, he must have found that useful. I imagine a psychology, especially social psychologist, would have a great insight into marketing. That'd be a huge part of that industry.
Well, social psychology is part of the philosophy, if you
Hmm.
will, of marketing.
Yeah.
Social psychology, we think of psychology is, or rather, what we think of as psychology is really clinical psychology. You've got a problem, you go to a therapist, you talk about your problem, all the different things in the world that affect you. Social psychology is how any given thing affects a lot of people. So it's sort of it's the psychology of marketing. It's the psychology of how you treat employees. What color do we paint the factory to get the best result from keeping the employees happy? All that revolves around social psychology. And so marketing is part and parcel of that.
Yeah, I'm a graphic designer by day, so I'm very familiar with many aspects of that. Part of the schooling that
Sure,
I
of
went through
course.
was
You have to know how people will react to types of imaging, types of lettering, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, it's a pretty interesting industry for if you're outside of it. Like if you don't know much about it. I mean, most people. I mean, every day you're bombarded by marketing. That's just the way our
Yeah.
lives are now. But when you actually get inside as to how deep some of these things go and how much thought and science goes into it, it's amazing the
Yeah,
level
absolutely.
of work.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, so you got right off the get, you got started as a marketing consultant with Star Wars,
Yeah.
and that was wow. Okay, but
That was 1976.
oh wow. I noticed like just looking through some of your work, like on your IMDb and other things. There's quite a few. Obviously I'm a huge nerd too. I'm a big fan of a lot of genre stuff, sci-fi stuff, horror stuff. And I see you worked on The Wicker Man. I feel like I have to ask you
Yeah.
about that because that's one of my favorites. So, what was marketing? Was
Yeah.
that just marketing that film? We're trying to figure out how to market that film.
Yeah. The film was made in England,
Yeah.
was released. They made a deal with Warner Brothers um, for American distribution. Warner's didn't really know what to do with it.
Yeah. I
Warner's,
can't imagine you bringing that movie to a company like Warner Brothers and being like, "Hey, figure
yeah,
out how
well,
to market
it was
this,"
sort
right?
of, it's been a long time now, but
Yeah.
I seem to remember there was a company called National General, which is a very nebulous name. You're
Yeah,
going to have
absolutely.
a fake company, you'd call it
Yeah,
National
yeah,
General.
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, they were a distribution company and they had the rights and they went bankrupt, not because of that film, but
Mhm.
just in general. They released a lot of movies and Warner's picked up their slate of films and they didn't know what to do with The Wicker Man. And they consulted with Roger Corman,
Mhm.
who advised them to shorten it and tighten it up and various other things.
That sounds like what he would do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, and Warner's did a test market of the film with a terrible ad campaign, um, which showed the Christopher Lee character, Lord Summerisle, in the burning Wicker Man. So, way to give away the ending.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But it was like, you need a big action, exciting thing in the poster, I'm sure is what Roger told them. Or maybe they just came up with it, but that was what they did. They tested it in like Texas and a couple of other places,
Mm,
did terrible business.
mhm.
And so they shelved it. And it got picked up and it became kind of uh, a legend in the horror movie fandom. And it's really not a horror film, it's really a thriller.
Yeah, I'd say more so. I mean, yeah, it's more of a horror film in the last 5-10 minutes, but aside from
Yeah,
that, it's the
yeah,
build up to it is more of a mystery than anything.
yeah. Anyway, it was for a long time. It was kind of this legend in horror fandom,
Mm.
and and now I have to Ron Weinberg and Micheline Charest, who were a husband and wife couple working in low budget distribution, decided to go out on their own, and they acquired the rights to The Wicker Man.
Hmm.
And they screened it for a bunch of people in LA, and I was one of them. And I met with them and I said, look, I'm working at Lucasfilm. There's only so much I can do, but this is a great film, and if you need help, I'll be happy to do what I can. And they hired me I designed the poster, which is that the poster that about a dozen different companies have since used for the Wicker Man. It's the one with the big yellow mandala and the silhouettes of the townspeople in the animal mask.
It's iconic. It's awesome. I love that poster.
Yeah, well, I designed that poster.
Wow.
I wrote the press kit and did the basic marketing for the film for its initial release. We released it here in LA. Then they bicycled it up to San Francisco. We opened there. We opened day and date with Superman.
Oh wow.
And we ended up being the #2 movie in San Francisco. Superman was #1. And we played in LA for several weeks before it went to San Francisco. Went to San Francisco, played there really in just one theater, but to sell out crowds for like 6 weeks. And they basically bicycled it around 1, 2, 3 cities at a time with the film. Eventually, they went back to Canada, where they were from, got into the animation business. The rights went to other companies, and other companies have since released it. And like I said, most of the other companies have ended up using that poster I designed.
Yeah.
But that was my involvement. I spent time with Christopher Lee. I booked him on a couple of LA area talk shows and took him in, drove him to, we were on Good Day LA or whatever it was called.
Wow.
I mean, it was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well,
it's hard to remember those details.
He's very vocal in interviews how much he I think he said many times that's his favorite film that he's ever made.
Yeah. Oh no, he was very vocal.
Yeah.
What he hated was they would always introduce him as Dracula.
Yeah, I was gonna say he did really seem to dislike that. I'm a fan of the show called Trailers from Hell. It's like Joe Dante. Yeah, Joe Dante does it.
Yeah, Joe's also a friend.
Oh, really? Wow. I'm a huge fan of him as well. So
yeah, he's a great director.
Oh, absolutely. He's everything he's made. I deeply. You can probably see the gremlins in my office. I deeply love. But wow, that's cool. I listen to his podcast as well, and he's mentioned several times on that show about how much Christopher Lee really hated his continually being associated with Dracula, even on Trailers from Hell, when I think they did horror.
Yeah, because there's no way you could get around his being a definitive Dracula.
Yeah, he was great. I loved him.
Yeah, but he'd done so much other stuff. He hated that was the only thing they associated him with.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I just recently watched a really obscure movie he was in with Alan Arkin called The Return of Captain Invincible. It's like a musical where he plays the villain in it. It's a very interesting movie, but it's cool. It's neat. So, well, working for Star Wars, I mean, you were right in the ground floor when that was like exploding, I guess, right? Because at that point, you guys, like you said, you didn't know what to expect about how it would go.
Anyone who said they knew it was going to be a huge hit is lying or was delusional.
Yeah.
We were working on the movie, when George and Gary made the movie, it was, let's make a movie we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the movies being made in the early and mid 70s were very, profound, and they all got run over by a truck endings, Easy Rider, that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of,
yeah,
the world is awful. That it was like everyone was making Russian novels.
yeah. That's true.
Um, and they wanted to make something that was upbeat and exciting, an old-fashioned kind of adventure movie. And they figured there would be other people like them who wanted to see that, but no one had any idea how many people wanted to see that. Um, we were hoping, we were confident, and maybe we were foolishly confident, but we were confident the movie would do well, but well meant would more than break even,
Hmm.
would be successful enough that we could maybe make a sequel. You know,
Yeah, and then some. Yeah,
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 no one thought it was going to be the number one movie of the year,
yeah.
let alone 40 plus years later, we're still talking about Star Wars.
Hmm.
They're still making Star Wars movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
That was nuts. No one had any idea something like that would happen.
Yeah. Now more than ever, right? It's just continually rolling out.
Yeah.
So continuing on with the market, did you work, like, obviously, since you said that Joe's a friend, did you work with Mick Garris as well? I know he early on was involved with
Well,
Star Wars.
yeah. When I started at Star Wars, Mick was our receptionist.
Yeah, that's what he talks about on the show. Yeah.
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 So yeah, I knew Mick. We knew each other very well. And funny, I was just seeing, I'm old enough that I'm still on Facebook.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, well, me too, I guess.
um Mick and I saw something that reminded me, I think it was The Last Jedi. I went to a screening at Disney of it. And this was after the film was out, but we were going to see it a second time and taking a friend. And Mick was there, and Mick and I were talking about how funny it was that after you know sitting together so much at Lucasfilm
Mhm.
in 1977,
Yeah.
now here we were now sitting in the same row at Disney Studios watching Last Jedi. Yeah, so Mick's another friend. So
Cool.
we
Yeah, I was curious because I noticed in some of the other things you marketed for were other things that he has talked about working on his show, like The Thing, and some of those things as well.
yeah.
Did you work closely with Ken Russell, like in Altered States? Was at all for the marketing of that, or is that
I
outside?
I I I talked to Ken Russell. I didn't really. I worked with him in that I was working on the
Yeah,
movie that he was directing, but we didn't spend a lot of time together. I had a couple conversations with him, basically.
'cause he's got such a, there's such a aura about him as a filmmaker and kind of being a bit of a madman. So I was just
Yeah, yeah.
curious
I
if,
mean, he's an amazing filmmaker.
yeah,
Um, I always thought that Kubrick should have done The Shining, and he should have done uh,
oh,
Kubrick
yeah,
should have done Altered States, and he should have done The Shining.
that would have been interesting.
It seemed like their sensibilities would have crossed better that way.
I have the Criterion channel, and they just put The Devils on, which I've never seen.
Ah,
And I've kind of been holding it as like a holy a special time to watch. And I think the time is now because I've been really interested in that one.
yeah, The
Um,
Devils is a really odd picture. It was um, the audiences of that time, I don't think were ready for it.
oh no, not at all. I'm a fan of films like that. Like I was a big fan of Sam Fuller as well. And
Oh
like
yeah.
I actually just some friends of mine gave me a region-free Blu-ray machine for Christmas. So I've been picking up a few things I've always wanted to get, but never could because I never had I've only had a region A. So I got White Dog in the mail today, which was like
Ah,
another one that was the one that, like, essentially kind of ruined him for the American audience for quite a while, sadly. But
yeah.
yeah, he was another genius in my mind.
Yeah, but the Thing was another movie that was ahead of its time.
Oh, I'm a massive fan. So I'm
I,
curious about that as well.
we did a lot to market that movie, and Universal was absolutely behind it. But I really believe it was too convincing It was literally terrifying,
Mhm.
especially compared to the movies that came out at that time. And audiences, even some horror audiences, are like, "Oh, it was just too much for them."
Mhm.
Now it's still very powerful, the stuff you see, but it isn't so much more than a lot of other horror movies.
Mm.
I think audiences can react to it better today, but back then, it really seemed to me as a marketing consultant on it, and with the audiences I screened it for, they were just overwhelmed by the horror elements.
Mm. Well, I think like an effects movie like that probably hadn't really been like you had aliens and stuff, I guess, but
Yeah.
but not to the extent when you see so many different horrifying versions because the thing would constantly change. And
Yeah, and Rob Bottin did
oh, so
just
good.
terrific, terrific job with
Yeah.
it. We had I mean, when you're using animals, you have the Humane Society come in to
Mm.
inspect how they're being treated and stuff. And they insisted on examining the mechanical dogs, the ones that converted into
Mhm.
the alien
Yeah.
creature, the thing,
Yeah.
um, to make sure we weren't doing some weird shit to
Oh,
real
wow.
dogs
Wow.
to get that effect to happen.
Wow.
Because the dogs, the animatronics as in their dog form were so believable. And that's usually where you get the fall down. You get the uncanny valley thing
Mhm.
where they don't look quite right. They look so good when they like split open and grew monster heads and stuff. They thought we were doing weird things. They wanted to actually see
Yeah.
these animals.
Make sure the dog wasn't injured or you weren't hadn't
Yeah,
rigged up to
yeah.
the machine somehow.
And I mean that just goes to what a great job he was doing and the way John was filming it.
Well, Carpenter is a genius to me. I know he's
Yeah,
another up with Dante's another one of those guys that's never made a movie I haven't thoroughly enjoyed.
yeah, yeah.
But but didn't it open against ET or wasn't ET like at the same time roughly? I think it was something like because it was like the horrifying alien versus the cuddly cute alien, and it was sort
Yeah,
of like a America made their decision sadly, or well, the world made its decision.
yeah.
But no, the thing is it's I guess as a marketing person, it must be interesting for you to see with the benefit of time to see how these movies are accepted as time goes on and they
Yeah,
become cult
I
classics and they
mean,
have these screenings.
Star Wars was accepted
Yeah,
immediately
of course.
after it came out. Coming into it, there was a lot of disdain and disbelief. But I worked on a number of movies that unfortunately didn't work at the time, but have since been declared classics. The Thing, The Dark Crystal, um, even The Last Starfighter.
Yeah, I just watched that recently. Actually, me and my wife did. I got the I think the Arrow release of it that came out recently, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really fun movie.
Yeah, it is. And they just over time they have found their audience and are very well regarded. They do really well in home video and now streaming before cable. Um, but they just didn't click at the time they came out because heavy metal was another one. Heavy metal animation fans weren't into rock fans weren't into animation when that movie came out.
Yeah, yeah,
Today it would do great.
the classic now. Well, another
Yeah,
one too that I see worked on, which is actually one of my favorite Disney films, but one that is kind of controversial, is The Black Cauldron. Because I know that one didn't do very well for Disney, and I think it like abysmal, like it really hurt Disney quite a bit at the time.
yeah.
Between that and I think what was the other, The Black Hole? I think that was another one that they'd put
The
money
black
a
hole,
lot of
yeah.
money into that didn't return as much either. But those
Well,
are
yeah,
both
black
very.
hole did
Oh,
okay.
did it? Okay.
Wasn't as successful as they had hoped.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Black Cauldron did not do well.
yeah, but it's an awesome movie. Like I had an animator from that on the show a little while ago, who's worked on some of the X-Men things down the line, and he had a few stories about it just because he'd worked with like Bakshi and did some of that stuff back in the day with the rotoscope, and all that sort of filmmaking. But
Hmm.
as someone from on the marketing side of things, was that just like Disney trying their hand at doing something a little darker, or was it?
Yeah, it was them trying something darker. It's a film project that they had held for a long time.
Mhm.
It had been in development and for quite a few years. Um, that was the whole thing when Don Bluth and his
Mm.
adherents in the animation division walked away from the studio. That had been coming, but Black Cauldron was a major impetus for it happening then. Don wanted more input into the story, and the powers that be that Disney wanted him to stay just animating and stay away from the story. And I know Don, and I've known him for many years. I think he's a fabulous animator. I don't think he's a fabulous storyteller. Um, so I don't know enough about what was going on with Dark Crystal because that happened actually before I was brought into Dark Crystal. Um,
And that was mostly like, wasn't it mostly Jim Henson trying to get away from doing like trying to make
oh, I'm sorry,
puppetry?
not Dark Crystal, Black
Oh,
Cauldron.
Black Cauldron. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
That was.
Dark Crystal was Jim wanting to do different kinds of things. He always wanted to do other types of
Mhm.
things, but I meant Black Cauldron.
Yeah.
Don wanted to be involved with story, and they didn't want him, and that was kind of when he finally said, "Okay, then I'm out of here,"
Mhm.
and he took a bunch of animators with him, and they went off and founded, Bluth Studios. Um, and so eventually it got brought into production again. It's also the time when there was that whole change in management at Disney, and
Mhm.
originally um, the new management didn't want to do animation. They thought, they were guys from Paramount. They didn't
Mhm.
understand animation. They wanted to shut animation down, and there was a whole stockholders revolt. And,
Mhm.
you know, anyway, that's when Disney went through its whole revitalization. But part of that was the Black Cauldron.
Mhm. Wow. Because it's like as far as like that and the Sword and the Stone were always two that I always felt kind of like outliers. I mean, Sword and the Stone is a little closer to what their normal movies are,
Hmm.
but the Black Cauldron always just seems so. I mean, you have your goofy sidekick and your lovable kid antagonist or protagonist, but like the villain is just terrifying. That in design and in
Yeah.
the in depiction, and they had like the zombies and all the other things that come into life. Like it's
And the funny thing is, it's based on a series of books by Lloyd Alexander,
Mhm.
and the bad guy, the villain in the movie, was a minor bad guy
Oh, really?
in the book,
Wow.
but they had bumped him up.
Yeah, I'd say.
And because one of my jobs at Disney was I went and met with Lloyd, who lived in Pittsburgh, and talked to him about making how the movie was being made and what the
Hmm.
changes were, and reminding him of that old story about the author who said, "Oh, Hollywood ruined your books." And he goes, "No, no, they're fine. They're right here on the shelf.
Yeah, yeah.
Just made these weird movies."
Yeah.
Um,
Stephen King says that a lot. People ask him about if, how he feels about them fucking up his movie or fucking up his book. He's like, my book's fine. The book's still there. He's like, if someone makes a shitty movie that, or like, I don't think I love the Black Cauldron, but if someone makes a movie that people disagree with, well, that's on them, and that's the movie's its own thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I can see why some authors would have trouble with that, I guess, because it's probably they're so close to it. Obviously, it's their creation, their
Yeah.
baby.
And I always tell people there are two different ways to judge things. One is how faithful an adaptation a movie is,
Mhm.
and how good the movie is in and of itself.
Yep.
And that's a different thing. Whether it's a good movie is different with how faithful it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make like a truly faithful adaptation of a book, the movie'd have to usually be like 8 hours long. And
Yeah, exactly.
like as a nerd, comic fans, like I constantly am trying to just like rally somewhat against because people get so upset when they change anything. if like a character is black instead of white in the comic, they lose it, or whatever. And it's like, dude, just like enjoy it for what it is, or don't let it color it. Go watch it and make your own
Yeah,
decision based on it.
it's and it's really weird when you're talking about a fantasy character that
Yeah, yeah,
doesn't exist,
yeah,
and you change this character to be a different race or a
yeah.
different gender. It's like, yeah, there aren't actually mermaids. There aren't actually
Yeah, yeah.
vampires. There
Yeah.
aren't.
Yeah, they could be what you want them to be. Just because one version had a redheaded, white mermaid doesn't mean that a new live action one with it. Like people just get so caught up in the minutia of
Yeah,
that. It's like the story is the more important thing, and the director's job or the casting director, or both of them, is to figure out a way to tell the story, to service the story they want to tell in
yeah,
the proper way. And they feel this actor is the best way to do it. Just trust them. I mean, if or
yeah. Unless it's important to the
yeah,
story,
agreed. Yeah.
what whether the character is black or white or
Mm.
Asian or male or female or tall or
Yep.
short,
Yep.
that really doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's not like the story is a story of that, someone being representing that culture, that those people.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, well, like just I want to talk about your transition to out of I'm assuming that when you went into writing, you stepped out of marketing, but I mean, you'd worked on The Hitcher too, which is another horror movie that I
Yeah.
have a lot of reverence for, and a lot of people in the horror community do as well. Um, how interesting. Well, I mean, I assume the Muppets and some of the other things you worked on. Well, I guess before I get to The Hitcher, I do have one question about the Return to Oz, because talking about some of the things you've worked on that are kind of outliers for some of the
Uh,
things that Disney worked on, that's another one, because that movie is generally terrifying. As a kid, to
yeah.
watch that, I think I watched it on the Wonderful World of Disney as a child, and I was disturbed by it as like I don't know, 6 years. When did it come out?
Yeah,
85.
I
So.
mean and we had conversations about it. The electroshock therapy
Mhm.
stuff
Yes, yes.
in the frame story, very powerful.
Hmm.
And we
It's a
talked.
great movie. It's a great movie.
Oh yeah,
People,
I think it's a great movie. I
yeah.
think it's a great adaptation of The World of Oz. It's
Hmm.
actually a combination of a couple books,
Yes, yeah.
but um, we had conversations with Walter about the electroshock and how dark it was,
Hmm.
but it's what he wanted to do as the director. Um, and he was a huge Oz fan. Um, and so, yes, it is very dark, especially because a lot of people misremember the original Wizard of Oz
Hmm.
movie or the famous original Wizard of
Yes,
Oz
yeah,
movie. There were Wizard of Oz shorts before that,
yeah.
but um, you know, one of the reviews I remember Richard Schickel, who was a big
Hmm.
film critic at the time, said that Mombi was terrifying, um, and the Wicked Witch of the West was a comical stereotype of a witch
Hmm.
in the 1939. It's like she was terrifying in 1939,
Yeah, yeah.
and because of that performance, that became the stereotype of what a witch is.
Yeah, oh, yes.
She wasn't comical at all, but he's seeing it through the eyes of a 40 or 50-year-old or however he was, having seen it, many times on
Hmm.
TV and not what it played like originally, because the original was a very scary movie as well. They just forget that.
Yeah. Well, I guess from a marketing standpoint, like marketing essentially a sequel to, such a beloved movie as, especially much like 50 years later.
Yeah,
With, a new Dorothy, a new everything. And Frusa Balk was someone that was in a lot of films when I kind of grew up with her, I guess. Like
yeah,
I was born in 85, so I would have, come to this a little later. But, like from a standpoint of trying to get that out there and trying to get people to appreciate it as its own thing and not completely compare it to the original over and over again
yeah,
must have been an uphill battle.
yeah. I mean, that was always part of it. I mean, I went to the International Wizard of Oz Club, is what you would expect of it, a club of
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz fans. and they have uh, conventions, gatherings all over the US and all over the world. I was really only dealing with them here, but I'm sorry, I was just distracted. Outside my window, a driverless car just went by.
Oh, wow.
One of the ones with all the radar and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
So
Interesting.
so they're doing a lot of testing here in my neighborhood.
Oh,
So
cool. Well, hey, I'm excited for the day that becomes a thing. Friends of mine are
yeah,
like, I don't know, I don't want it. I'm like, I can't wait to tell my car to drive somewhere and I can sleep in the back
yeah,
until I get there. It'd be amazing. Fantastic.
yeah. But so I was just distracted
Yeah,
seeing it go
that's
by
all
my
right.
window. Anyway, so would meet with them and I would show them slides and tell them about it and how, you know, yes, Mombi as a character appears in the third Wizard of Oz book,
Mhm.
and her entire job is to tell Dorothy, who was not in the second Wizard of Oz book, excuse me, tell her what happened in the last book while she wasn't there.
Mhm.
And that's the only time we see her.
Mhm.
But she had that really cool thing with changing heads.
Yeah.
And so um, Walter wanted to keep that. And so he expanded and combined Mombi with another character to make her a character that plays throughout the movie.
Mhm.
Because to just waste her as, let me tell you what happened while you were gone.
Yeah.
So we were making those kinds of changes. And explaining it that way to the Wizard of Oz Club people was like, yeah, we get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well,
Changes aren't always bad if there's a reason for making the changes.
I'm just sort of amazed by the like sort of the grassroots nature of even like marketing at that time period for big films like these, like with huge budgets, like just to going to conventions and talking to people that like are like the fans. Like it just seems
Yeah.
like it seems like such a more down to earth method of doing it than it's
Oh,
almost I kind of feel like we lost something by not having that. I guess because you can reach so many people now with the internet. But
yeah. Well, we still have companies. I mean, I'm not in that business anymore, but
mhm.
you still see companies they're going to the larger conventions,
Yes, yeah, oh yeah,
which which didn't exist back in the 70s and 80s when we
yeah,
were doing
yeah.
this. Um, we went to San Diego Comic-Con, but back then it was in the single digit thousands as
Mhm.
opposed to 150,000.
Yeah, it's huge.
Dragon Con didn't exist back then. Um, but we went to conventions to talk to the people who not only would go, but would be talking to lots of other people. When you've got a hobby, when you know, people who go to comic conventions don't only exist at comic conventions.
Mhm.
They're doctors and lawyers and waitresses and dry cleaners and whatever. And they talk to people and they'll talk to people about things they love. And that was basically going to a grassroots kind of marketing. And companies are still doing it today.
Mhm.
And even on the internet, on social media, you go to specific groups who are interested in the thing. Yes, you're using the internet, which is billions of people, but and while you may post something on Twitter or X, you're also posting it on the thus and such Facebook group
Mhm.
or you know, the something or other website to get to the more you can target your uh, the people who might be interested in your film. That's why, for example, when I was still at Lucasfilm, we were doing More American Graffiti. I went to the National Hot Rod Association because hot rodding is part of American Graffiti,
Mhm.
and we in fact shot at NHRA events. So I got them. They have a newspaper that goes to the hundreds of thousands of people who go to NHRA events. And so we got them to cover the movie.
Yeah.
We had the hot rods from More American Graffiti on display at the in Indianapolis. It's not the Indianapolis 500. It's the other big Indianapolis race that NHRA puts on.
Mhm.
For Excalibur, which Warner Brothers was marketing as a guy's action movie, I set up a pictorial with Bride magazine of the wedding of Arthur and Guinevere to let um, female possible moviegoers know there's a softer side to it. It isn't all guys hacking each other with swords.
Mhm.
There is a romance. There is a beautiful wedding, um, something that might interest them. So it's always finding more when companies aren't lazy. This is a big
Yeah.
bugaboo of mine. A lot of modern marketing is incredibly lazy.
Oh, I agree.
Um, but it's finding who is my audience and going out to them. I hated the marketing on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny
Mhm.
because what did any of the marketing tell you? Indiana Jones is old, but sometimes we have him young.
Yeah.
Did it tell you
Yeah.
anything else about this movie? What
Nope.
was it about? What the heck was the Dial of Destiny?
Yeah.
You know, why should I go see this movie unless I want to be mystified that they could make old Harrison Ford look like young Harrison Ford?
Well, they just lean so a lot of the new properties that are the new expansions on old properties is
Yeah.
just leaning so hard in nostalgia. It's like it's all they have.
Yeah,
So it's like
and
here,
I
look,
think
here he is. Look, he's Indiana Jones again. That's what you want, right? Look, there it is. Go
and I
watch it.
think it was incredibly lazy. You knew nothing about what
Yeah.
the movie was about.
No.
On the on the other hand, Barbie was the most brilliant marketing campaign I've seen in at least a decade.
Yep.
It
Oh
was
yeah.
amazing. It was all over. It made people who would never in a million years go to a Barbie movie want to go see that movie. And that
Yeah.
movie made over $1 billion.
Yeah. I was a big fan of it. And I'm not
Yeah, I mean,
necessarily their target audience, but I mean, I think choosing Greta Gerwig to do that movie was calculated in a way because like her voice in film is far she's very intelligent. I love her films, but it's far beyond just a bubblegum type movie. So like you knew she was going to
oh
take
yeah,
it the way.
they didn't make what you would think of when you hear Barbie
Yeah,
movie. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Um, they certainly didn't make the kind of movie you see with all the animated Barbie
Hmm.
movies.
Yeah,
And they marketed a movie to make you want to see what is this about? What kind of movie is this? You knew the property, you knew what the IP was, but you didn't know what that movie was going to be.
yeah.
And I mean, that was clever, thoughtful, creative marketing.
Hmm. Um,
And I hate the fact that so many studios today just go for the easiest route.
mhm.
Um,
Well, it's paint by numbers. It's a horror movie. Like the horror trailers tell you almost the entire movie now when you watch a horror movie. If you watch it like a Conjuring trailer or whatever, like you watch it and they tell you everything. By the end of it, you even know mostly who the killer is or who it's going to be, and like you're
yeah,
just they don't surprise you and they don't really tell you much. It's just like it's just late. You're right. It's lazy. I think it's just very paint by numbers for these companies that put these things together.
yeah, they don't put thought and creativity behind
No,
it.
it's all numbers probably now. They just look at what
Yeah,
what
and
what things they show and what things get the most eyes on them, and that's it. There's not a lot of cleverness involved.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, but that's now we're still going out to places.
Mhm.
Companies are still going out when they're taking the time, when they're doing the thinking. Um, certainly every genre movie today goes to the big comic conventions.
Mhm. Oh yeah, yeah. Um, so what was well, I wanted to ask you about the Hitcher, I guess, before I got into your other stuff. But how was that as an experience to work on?
I mean, it was interesting. The studio wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Um, it was hard. It was in some ways harder because it wasn't like you can go to Comic Con. There weren't horror conventions
Yeah,
back
right.
then.
Right.
Um,
Well,
but
it's
we did
also
our
a movie that's built solely basically around like the charisma of Rucker Howard.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a great movie, but he's very menacing and terrifying in it. And is it Thomas Howell? Is that his name? The guy that played the main guy? I can't remember his name right now, but
yeah,
Thomas C. Howell, I think, or something like that. But
yeah, I think so.
yeah, it's a really interesting horror movie and something that's kind of quite different than what else was coming out around that time period um, in that
Yeah.
industry. So I just marketing that must have been an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I mean, and we did what we could always to broaden the market and make sure we found all the people who might be interested in it as a movie.
Mhm. So what was the transition from marketing to writing? How did that occur?
Well, I was always writing different types of things, but I'd been doing movie marketing for about 10 years. And I found I was working with fewer and fewer filmmakers and more attorneys and MBAs who are now
Mm,
running studios. And I would get, you know, they didn't really understand the difference between publicity and advertising. They didn't get why we should do publicity. Advertising's a sure thing.
yeah,
You're going to spend this much money and get that many eyeballs on your ad. Um, it's much, much more expensive than doing publicity, but you can't count on publicity. You can try to do things to publicize a movie, but you don't know if anyone's going to pick up the story. You don't know if anyone's going to show up for the event. Um, so it's a bigger risk. And I was in a lot of meetings explaining why to do publicity as opposed to actually doing publicity.
yeah, yeah. You're
Um,
almost teaching a class instead of doing your job.
and I want to do something more directly creative. And I always liked writing. I hadn't intended, I was an animation fan, but I hadn't intended to end up mostly writing animation.
Hmm.
Um, it's just sort of, sorry, I've got a cat who's rubbing her head against
Oh,
the,
quite all right. I got three of them that wander around and sometimes show up
um,
on the show as well.
she's just rubbing her head against my laptop. And
Oh, that's okay. It's only an audio podcast anyway, so you can
yeah.
let it rub away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, so um, I ended up in animation because that was the first opportunity I had.
Hmm.
Um, I knew J. Michael Straczynski, who
Big,
later created Babylon 5,
oh,
among other things.
big fan. I love his Spider-Man run. Big fan of it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Joe was an animation writer. He had just been hired to do the animated version of Ghostbusters, which was called The Real Ghostbusters.
Oh,
Uh,
very familiar. I was a big fan of that show growing up.
And I went to Joe and said, "Hey, we knew each other, so I find everyone's Hollywood story includes the phrase, 'I knew this guy' or 'I met this woman,'
Yeah.
and and it's sort of a door gets open.
Hmm.
It's not so much, 'Oh, you're my nephew, and I'm going to keep hiring you no matter what,' but it's the door gets open and you can show your stuff, and then you have to
Yeah. If
prove,
you're terrible, like it doesn't matter who you know, you're probably not going to get anywhere.
yeah."
Like you're right. Knowing someone does help get a door open, but you need to have the talent to be able to walk through it.
It's the door to knock on.
Yeah.
You've got to prove yourself once you get there. Anyway, I talked to Joe back in that time period, which was the mid '80s. There was what was called the syndication market, where network shows would do like 22 or 26 episodes. Syndicated shows would do 65 episodes. They'd play 5 days a week, um, you know, and they'd run for 3 months, and then they'd run them again, then they'd run them again. And they were on the local stations as opposed to the network stations. But when you're doing an order of 65 episodes, you need a lot of writers. When today a lot of shows are 12 episodes, and so you get three guys or even just one guy or women. I use guy generically.
Yeah, no worries.
But you get one person and they could do the whole thing. 65 episodes on a short turnaround, you need to hire a lot of people. You end up taking chances on some new writers. So I went to Joe. He gave me a chance. I ended up doing 3 episodes for the first season of The Real Ghostbusters. Um, then I got hired at a different company on a show called The Bionic Six, which most people haven't heard of.
You know what? I do remember it only because the theme song lives in my
Uh,
head somehow. Every once in a while, it just pops in there.
It
And
never really went into syndication.
no, I don't
It
know
was
where I would have
it
seen
was
it, but
done by Universal Studios, and they were terrible at syndicating any of their shows after their initial run.
mhm.
But I did 10 episodes of that show, and I just kept going from show to show, and then I would got hired to develop shows for companies, and just so mostly ended up staying in animation. Um, I wrote some episodes of Showtime's horror series, The Hunger.
Yeah, I noticed that. That was what I was going to ask you about because I remember watching that show quite a bit and growing up. Well, probably later on. I think they had reruns on the Movie Network or something that I
Yeah.
used to catch as they came along.
Yeah, I wrote 2 episodes of its first season, and then they changed the producers who hired all new writers.
Hmm. That was sort of Showtime's answer to Tales from the Crypt, I believe, wasn't it? They were trying to do their own thing.
It was, but Showtime, it started out as a syndicated, it was going to be, or not syndicated, it was going to be an anthology vampire series because taking off from The Hunger.
Yeah, the movie with David Bowie. Right?
Right, because the show came out of basically Ridley and Tony Scott's
Hmm.
company, plus a company in Canada. And so it was all going to be uh, an anthology of vampire stories. And then Showtime said, we don't know if people are going to want to watch a vampire story every week. Let's just make it different horror stories. And then they were like, oh, we're a premium channel. We could have naked people having sex. So all of the stories ended up, even ones that we'd already finished, ended up going back and having people
Sex
be
scenes
naked.
added. Yeah. I feel like that was probably the extent of why I was watching it because I think it was like I used to babysit my neighbor's kids and when they were going to sleep I just watched the movie network and then that was one that was always on right after they'd gone to bed and I was just waiting for the parents to come back and it was almost consistently would have some kind of naked stuff in it. Almost it's
Yeah,
funny that I didn't realize that was like a prerequisite that the studio placed on it, but that makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
because it was, premium channels are like, oh, we could do this stuff they can't do on TV. That's how we'll get people to watch.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it had a
and
decent run. I believe it was on for a few years, wasn't it?
they did 2 years of new shows. Like I said, we did one year that I wrote on, and then um,
Yeah, they had David Bowie host the second season. I remember that as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so they went away, they came back with new producers who hired the writers they liked.
Mm.
Um, but I did 2 episodes of that show. Um, and that was a lot of fun. Um, they were they were sort of the comedy horror episodes.
Yeah. Did you feel like that's sort of your wheelhouse as far as because I noticed a lot of your work is, in the animation wheelhouse, but if you're going that route into the live action and bringing comedy with it, I mean, animation in itself has usually a comedy bend because you have to entertain kids, right?
Yeah, well,
So,
I mean, my I in the 30 years I've been doing animation writing, I've written, you know, preschool, educational, boy show, girl show, all comedy, action, adventure. But my favorites to write are comedy adventure,
mm.
which is what, The Real Ghostbusters was.
Yeah, that was a very fun show. Uh, I think even as a kid when I watched it, I didn't have a sense of the original movie. So like up until I think I became a teenager, that was what the Ghostbusters were to me, because that's what I saw every morning. I doubt my parents would have thought to put, I mean that came out in the 80s and I was born in 85, so I can't imagine
Yeah.
my parents would have thought to dust off Ghostbusters, and my parents weren't big movie people anyway to have me watch it. So, to me that was my Ghostbusters for like the bulk of my life
Yeah.
until I got to the point where I watched the movies. And even then, I think I had two on VHS, so I watched like Ghostbusters 2 way more than I ever saw one. So, but no, that's extremely cool. So, what are you working on now?
Well, I did my book, Star Wars Memories,
Oh, excellent.
um, which is it's all stories about not not fiction stories, but
Hmm.
anecdotes and articles about the years I worked on Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And that book's been selling very well. And I'm working on a follow-up book called More Movie Memories that'll be out next year.
Oh, awesome.
Which, when I started it, it was going to be about all the movies I worked on after I left Lucasfilm. But since then, I've also found a lot of photographs and artwork and stuff about the Star Wars movies that I was involved with. So there's going to be a big section of more Star Wars memories,
Oh, nice.
plus um, stories about the movies I worked on, such as some of the stuff we
Mhm.
talked about. And then there'll be a little bit about animation writing as well.
Cool. And that's available wherever people can get books?
It's available on Amazon. It's available through Barnes and Noble. At one point, at least, Walmart carried it.
Oh, well, excellent.
Um, and when I'm at conventions, I have copies that I sign for people. Um, but mostly it sells through Amazon and places like that.
That's awesome. Is there any like I guess I'm not too sure on the as far as like doing a book about those sort of stories. Is there anything that's involved with you needing to get permission from Lucasfilm or anything about that, or since it's your own stories, I guess it's your own world.
Yeah,
But use the title
well,
Star Wars Memories. I was just curious if they're cool with that.
yeah, it is a nonfiction book about things I did.
Hmm. No, fair enough.
Um, as I explained to one person, if I was a professor at Harvard and I wrote a book about my life teaching at Harvard, I don't need Harvard's permission to say
No,
I taught at Harvard
fair enough.
and this is what I did in my, you know, Psych 101 class or something like that.
Awesome.
You, you're not allowed to give away company secrets,
Hmm.
but there aren't really company secrets.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
guess I was more curious about if like a lawyer would have to read it first or something, like in that regard. So
no,
no, well,
no,
that's good.
not in this sort of thing where it's a
No,
first person um,
yeah,
type of
it's
thing.
not like you're revealing some trade secrets to,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. There's no trade
Yeah.
secret. Um, I'm telling stories of my life.
Mhm.
Um, yes, there are a lot of photos in it, and the ones that are copyright to someone else,
Mhm.
say this photo copyright Lucasfilm or this photo copyright
Yeah.
whoever took the photo. Um, interestingly, photos, photographs that are works for hire, like you see from a movie set,
Mhm.
because the person who was employed to take those are owned by the company. If if you take a photo of something, you own that photograph under American copyright law.
Mhm.
I'm not sure under Canadian or Berne Convention, but I think that's the case as well. Um, so technically, if you're out somewhere and you hand someone your phone and you say, "Hey, take a picture of us in front of this thing,"
Mhm.
the guy who took that photo actually owns that
Oh,
photograph.
that's funny.
You're right. Although I've never heard of a case of that being adjudicated because you're not making any money off of that photo and no
Yeah,
one's
no.
suing you for the rights.
Yeah.
But technically, that's how copyright on photographs work.
Oh, interesting.
So there's some photos in my book that are copyright individuals who gave me permission to use them
Mhm.
because they took those photos.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll look forward to reading that. Sounds like a really cool book.
It's gotten. I'm very pleased. Ego is something, but I'm actually very surprised and pleased at how good the reviews have been.
Oh, excellent.
All of the reviews on Amazon, for example, and Goodreads are fours and fives, and the ones that aren't are mostly because they don't think the reproduction of the photographs is high enough quality.
Oh, well, that's okay.
And it's like, this is not a photo book.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
book with photos to illustrate some of the stories in it, to some of the events in it, but it wasn't produced as a photo book. It's not on slick paper. It's not super high quality photographic reproduction, but it is got a lot of photos in it. But the people who are reviewing it for the content have been very kind and generous, and the reviews have all been really good. And one of the things I did specifically was I set out to not tell people things they already know. No one needs me to tell them how the lightsaber works,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because
Well
that's been
documented.
explained a million times. So it's all stories people haven't read, and a lot of people, including on like some of the big Star Wars fan sites, when the reviews are basically, I thought I knew everything about Star Wars, and I didn't know half the stuff in this book.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
Well,
I've been very pleased and happy at how well reviewed the book has been.
yeah, it is. I'm just looking at it on Amazon now. It's very affordable. And also you got it forwarded by Gary Kurtz, which is really cool. So
Forward by Gary Kurtz.
yeah, that's
Gary was
fantastic.
a good friend. I worked with him off and on for 40 years between Star Wars and his death on most every movie he worked on,
Wow.
and some of his other projects.
Well, it's quite a legacy in the industry, Craig. It was really cool to get a chance to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Well, thank you.
oh, thank you. And I'll definitely and plug the book on my socials and all that stuff as well. But for those listening, check it out. It's on a Canadian Amazon. It's $15. It's a paperback book. It looks amazing. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna order one now. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Craig. It was great talking with you.
Good talking to you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There it is, my chat with Craig Miller. Hope you enjoyed that one. I certainly did. I love those inside Hollywood stories, and I'm very excited to read his book. Make sure to check that out. Grab it wherever you get your books. Amazon, Goodreads, he mentions, has it available. Barnes & Noble. He even said Walmart did at one point. Might still be there. Check your local Walmart. But, if there's a mom-and-pop bookstore you can order it through, make sure to do that, because we want to support those small businesses and help them make a buck, as well as help guys like Craig who have interesting stories to tell. Get paid for their stories, their work, and I'm very excited to read that book. Very excited. I think it's going to be a fun little journey into a side of Star Wars that I'm unfamiliar with. And after talking with him in this interview, I'm so sure that the stories are going to be amazing and interesting that I know it's going to be a good read. So make sure to check that out. Anywho, our next episode will be with Mike Carlin. Now, if that name doesn't mean anything to you, you haven't been paying attention to comics, my friends, because Mike Carlin has been involved with comics for a very long time. He's a comic book writer. He's been a writer since the 70s. He's worked in all kinds of stuff. He's worked on Superman, most notably, but he's worked on... he oversaw the Death of Superman storyline when that happened, which is I'm very excited to chat with him about. Worked on Batman Adventures, worked on other Superman books, Captain America, various things here and there. So really cool, big thing for me. Carlin was and is a big part of the comics world, and as a writer has been a part of some pretty fundamental storylines in the comics, in comics. So it's a great conversation. I'm very excited to chat with him because it's going to be a good one. I'm sure of it. This guy has quite an impact in the industry. And certainly has a lot of stories to tell. So I'm excited to learn those and bring them to you through a nice little fun conversation. Anywho, that'll be next week, as we're now a weekly podcast. So be sure to tune into that and all the other podcasts from the United Federation of Podcasts. They're all out there, and they're all great. So tune in, check out the website. From there, you can link to it through mine, and see all the shows they have to offer, along with this one. So tune into that as well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll catch you again next time. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.